welcome back. This is on how a fork works, how to take them apart, and then we will be looking at a part 2 of the video where we will be putting it back together with all brand new seals and washers. So this is the fork that we've already taken apart, and we're going to go through it piece by piece so you actually understand what everything does, not just about how to pull it apart and pull it back together. We're going to start right down at the bottom at the shiny chrome tube. This is a stanchion, so this is a part that slides in and out of the actual fork leg, and it is what is actually you see moving when your suspension is working. The surface and finish on this is really important because all seals run on it, so if there is any pitted or rusted or it's been damaged, the seals will be destroyed very quickly as the stanchion slides up and down into the fork leg. The first thing it meets in the lower bushing, this one is one of the brass or the bronze coloured bushings here. So the job of this, it keeps the stanchion perfectly aligned inside the fork leg itself. So it stops it from moving side to side as it's going up and down inside there. So the bushing takes a lot of the load, especially under braking. Just above that, the upper bushing, which does the similar job but higher up in the leg. Together, these two bushings stop metal to metal contact and make sure that the fork moves smoothly instead of wobbling or bending. Sitting on top of that is the upper bushing supporter washer. So just here is the supporter washer. This is really important and often forgotten. This washer spreads the load from the oil seal to stop sharp edges damaging the seal underneath it here. So just here is the oil seal. So above that washer is the oil seal. This is the main sealing component. Its job is to keep the fork and oil inside the fork and stops it leaking out and coming down here. So sometimes when the damage, you'll start to see oil coming down here, and that's when it normally means that you have got some sort of oil leak, which is most likely because of this has been damaged. So it stops the leaking out, and from the spring side of the oil seal always faces downwards. If the seal fails, again, like I said, you will see the oil coming down the fork leg. Once the oil is sealed and pressed into place, it's locked in by a circlip, which is just here, which again, when we start taking this one apart, you will see me taking that circlip out just under the dust seal there. This circlip sits in a groove in the fork leg to physically stop the oil seal from moving upwards. Without this clip, the oil seal can pop out of place under pressure. And above that circlip is the dust seal. So as you can see here, we just got a dust seal there. So this keeps out grit and it keeps out water and dirt from getting into the oil seal. Think of it as its first line of defence. It presses in last and is the only part you can see from the outside once the fork is assembled. Inside the fork, running down the centre, is a dampening rod. So let me just pull that out a little bit so you can see. So the dampening rod, this controls how fast the fork moves, how far it moves up and down. So it has holes drilled into it. When the fork is compressed or extends, the oil is forced through holes, which creates resistance in that moving up and down. So when the fork is compressing, meaning the wheel is moving up towards the bike, the oil is forced through the dampening rod. That resistance slows the movement down. When the fork is extending again, which is called rebound, the oil flows back the other way again through the dampening rod, controlling how quickly the fork returns. The fork oil does two jobs. First, it provides dampening by flowing through the dampening rod. Second, it acts as an air spring, so the air trapped above the oil gets compressed as the fork compresses, which adds extra resistance near the end of travel. So now let's move on to the spring. So the spring is what actually holds the weight of the bike. When the rider and holding the bike the fork compresses, the spring is being compressed. When the fork actually extends, spring is pushing up the fork back up again into its position, meaning the coils are closer together at the end, which makes the fork feel softer at first and firmer into travel. At the top of the spring is usually a spacer. This one doesn't have a spacer, which sets preload, and then the fork cap, which seals everything together. So when the bike hits a bump, the wheel moves up and the fork compresses, the spring compresses, is the oil is forced through this dampener rod to control the speed of the movement up and down. When the bump is gone, the spring pushes the fork back down, and the oil again will flow back out of these parts. Because if it wasn't for that, again, it would feel like a pogo stick, just jumping up and down with no support there from any oil. And I think that's the best way to look at that, is if you think about a pogo stick, when you're jumping on it, it just bounces up and down very quickly with no sort of slowness. So if you were driving with a pogo stick as your suspension on your bike, you would constantly be bouncing up and down constantly over any sort of marginal movement. In the past, they used to just run on springs, but again, vehicles weren't as quick then. You know, anything over 20 mile an hour with just a spring, you would be pogoing all over the place. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to strip down this bike. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start taking out some of these bolts here. I'm going to take out this rod here, which runs around and holds onto the other side of where we took off this part here. So I'm going to take these off by just unscrewing these. And then I'm going to be able to then slide off the fork. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the camera and we're going to start taking some of these bits off together, and then we'll get this fork off, and then we will start taking it apart. So guys, welcome back. What we're going to do now is we're just going to prep up. I'm going to put some gloves on and we're going to start to get this fork off. Now, I am still learning just like you are, so I'm going to attempt to try to take it off. The other side came off pretty easy. It slid off one of the ball bearings under there, which I'll show you once I've got this one off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a bolt, a ratchet and stuff like that, and start taking some of this off. But first of all, for safety and to keep my hand clean, because the wife is going mental at me from coming in with black and dirty hands, so I am going to put some gloves on first, and then we're going to get started. So I have got a 12mm on here, and we're just going to start by taking some of this off. I'm also just going to use a bit of WD-40 so I don't break anything as we are doing this. And yes, I will clean all this off, especially when I put the bike back together, because we don't want any WD-40 in our braking system. Otherwise that will be quite fun when we're trying to stop. So I'm just going to start to undo some of these bolts. See if we can get this one cracked as well. What I am trying to do as well is just make sure that I'm putting the screws back in to where I found them, because when taking a bike apart, you do end up with a load of screws, different sizes, different lengths. So what we don't want to do is get too confused with where this stuff goes back. So wherever you can, try put the screws back in to where you found them. It'll just make it a lot easier when we start putting this back together. We are going to clean all the screws up and replace some of the really rusty ones and bad ones when we start putting this back together. But again, it makes it easier if you've got the original, so you can go find the perfect size nut. Washer's falling out there. Get that in a minute. Don't know where that has gone. I think it's gone in the brake, but I'll find that in a second. Okay, so now we're going to need a screwdriver to take this part off here. Again, I'm spraying it with some WD-40, because what I don't want to do is start threading this stuff and having to spend another hour trying to drill out a screw. And there we go. So now we've got these two supports off here, which will hold this bike on. Hi guys, welcome back. What I have got now is the bike set up in a vise, just so I can hold it up, so I can show you guys just how we're going to get this one off. Because on the other fork, what you have is the ability just to slide it off, because it just comes off. This bearing here, it just slides off once you've taken all the parts off of the rest of the fork and it's left on its own. It does just slide off there once you've done under a nut. So I'll just show you here. You would undo this nut here, which clamps this onto that, what we've just shown you there, and that one just slides off. This one's a bit different. It's screwed in here, so there is actually some threaded here, and this is actually screwed in, so if you're trying to yank this off, it's not going anywhere. I can show you that now. So what you need to do is you will need to get a hex bit in the back here, big enough to fit in here, then to start spinning it. So if I get it in here and I start to now turn that, as you can see it's starting to turn, that will start to release off this here. So you see there now, that screw is now turning inside that fork, which will now allow me to unscrew this completely off. And there we go. So as you can see, big nut on there. It's got some, I would believe that is some sort of thread locker on there to stop this from coming loose. Onto here, which I believe this is a speedo part with a big hex in there, which then allows me, if I really wanted to, is take out this whole bearing that goes through the wheel. What I did take off there is I used a big hex to get that off there. So let's now move on to the fork. So I'm going to work on this together and get this disconnected. This does take a bit of jiggery pokery to get this off, because we do need to start off with getting that seal out of the start here. And what we'll be doing is we'll be also unscrewing the bottom here, which holds in some components inside, and then we'll need to get this top off. I don't have anything big enough to get this off, so what I will do is I'll put it in the vise and I will hand turn it. That's how I got the last one off. We'll be respraying these anyway, so if they get a bit scratched or damaged, it doesn't matter. We'll be respraying trying these and fit into the new bike. There was some slight damage on this, and I did find there was some damage on the other spindle, the other chrome bit on the last one, so we are going to have to do some work as well to make sure that's smooth when it goes back on. So I'm going to start now with a bit of a screwdriver, try get into this and pull this out, and you'll be able to see that happening. So I've just got myself a nice thin screwdriver, and I'm just going to try get into these parts here and break apart and just slide that off. Now the other one did come off, it was a lot harder to get that off. That one's come off pretty easy, but last one I did have to kind of tap around it to get this disconnect off that part there. So next bit we're going to do is we're going to just unscrew this part of the bike. So I'm just going to lever that a bit in WD-40 just to make sure that that is going to come out. You can also use a bit of heat on that as well, heat all this up to release this if you want to. So I'm just going to get that part now. I'm going to take the wheel out as well, so I'm going to take out the top bit. I'm probably going to do that first before I take this bit out. While that's setting that WD-40, I'm probably going to take off the top bit in the vise first and show you that. Moving over to the vise here, we'll move that in. Best thing I probably have in my garage is this vise. So if you are going to work on something, definitely get yourself a vise. It solids up a lot of stuff, really does keep you a bit sane instead of holding things, trying to do stuff. It really does. So I'm just going to slide that into here. Now this isn't the proper way of doing it, guys. Just buy the part on Amazon. I'm too tight and haven't got the money at the minute to be spending more without my wife wanting to murder me. So I am now just going to do it this way. I'm going to take my gloves off to get a bit of grip. So once I've got it in the vise, I'm just going to twist it. I've put some new gloves on. Make sure there's no grease on there, otherwise you won't get it turning because you just won't be able to keep with the pressure. So pull quite hard like that, and as you can see there, it's just starting to release itself just there, like so. So we're just going to unscrew this to when it gets a bit less, quite easy to turn, a bit more. I'm going to take it out of the vise because the oil will drop out everywhere and we don't want that. I'm going to bring it back over to the table, and I'm then going to put a bit of a sheet down to try and trap some of the oil as we take this apart. Don't tell the missus that I'm using a towel. I'm sure it'll wash out. Anyway, so let's undo this just like so. And again, so I don't get the name wrong, I'm just going to put it just here. So that is the name of the part that we're pulling out now, including the rod that then sits through the dampening rod, which I'm sure this is an adjuster, so you can actually adjust on top your stiffness and so or how far the fork goes down. So I'm going to continue doing this. It's quite a big part. And there we go. So as you can see now, we're out. We can see the spring, see a dampener inside there. This is where it gets very, very fun. See, sorry, I've got some oil on there. So this part is the part where it can get very difficult if you don't have the tools. And guess what? I don't have the tools. So this is where it gets a bit fun. Because what we've got to do now is take off this part here inside here. So with the help at first, but I figured out, put it into a vise like this so you can pull down this here and locking this in place so it can't spin, and getting your spanner onto this is probably the best way to get this off, because unless you've got the tool which can hold this down, which will normally lock it under the nut there so you can turn it, I've got it under there and I'm able to now start to loosen this off. And I'll show you now just how difficult it can be. Okay. And now what we need to do now is actually turn this in here to start turning the thing itself, to start unscrewing it. So now we've got the bolt off, we need to get in here while holding it and unscrewing this fork itself. Sometimes you can get your fingers in there. Remember, don't tip this upside down because it will have oil in it. As you can see now, I can just get my fingers in there and just turn it with the device. Now coming very, very loose. There we go. So now we've poured this, now we've got this off, we can now put some of the oil, we'll do now show you in this glass. So take out the spring, pulling up and down dampener to get some of that oil out. So there it is, out it goes, and we've got the top off, which was very, very difficult with that spring, but that is the top off now, and the top cap off, which we can leave. So like I said earlier, this slides into the dampener here, and I believe it is an adjuster. Again, it is on the top there with what it is, but that just slides in the top of there, and then you can adjust it just by there, and it marginally adjusts how far the dampener and that can go down. So now what we're going to do is we're going to lift the leg back into position, and we're going to take out the dust seal there, and what you can do now is you can just give it a couple of whacks. No, you can't, because I've forgotten one of the crucial parts, and that is we need to take this circlip out. So there's a circlip just in there. So again, I'm just going to use a screwdriver, and just in here is the clip that goes in here. So it's right on the corner wall there, and you'll be able to just prise that out, just like that. Take that out there, just like that, and there's that clip that was on about at the start of the video. What I'm going to do now is just give it some nice friendly yanks. Now we've got the top off, nothing holding it in. And there we go, she's off. And there we go, we can end up with the same sort of thing. So we've got the oil seal, we've got this, the spacer to protect the metal from touching metal, and we've got our two upper bearings just there. One slots in, and we've got one that moves up and down. We've also got one of the holes that the oils will push through as and when this is going up and down, like we said earlier, and that controls that. So dust seal, all that kind of stuff, all matched up to that last one. And as you've seen, the spring sits on top of this, just like so, okay? And then we've got this that slides into there, just like that. That then bolts into this, and that creates the system. Obviously, we'd have the sleeve on there, and then moves up and down. But that is the fork all set up ready. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have to do some research on, first of all, the height of oil. So when we go to replace this, we need to know how much oil we need to put back into it. This is the oil that I've currently taken out of it, but what we can't do is just do that, because we might have had oil leaks in the past, we might have had some issues. That is looking fantastic. We do need to figure out that, but again, I haven't got any service manuals or anything like that, so I'm going to have to do some research around that. We're going to replace all these parts, so I'm going to get all these offline, find out what they are. The way to do that is I'm going to measure the circumference here and try get the parts on there, because there is, by looking at this, there's no numbers or anything on these, so I'm going to try research, try get the correct ones that I can for these forks. There's nothing, we don't need to take this out or anything like that. I'm not going to replace any of this. It all looks pretty decent inside there, so I'm going to leave all that. I'm just going to replace all the oil seals, and I'm going to top it back up with oil, and then we're going to put them all back together, both of these, ready to go back onto the bike when they're all fresh. So I will see you on the next little bit, or on the next part, on part 2, when we've got these parts that we need to then replace. Then we'll replace them all, and we'll put them all back together. So that is how to take these apart. I'm not saying I'm a professional. Just like me, I watched around 3 or 4 decent videos, did some research before I took all these apart, to fully understand the complexity of these parts, because they are complex, but they're not as scary as you thought. You know, once you've got in there and you've got these off, I think what the main thing is being able to keep stuff in order. So like I'm not taking these off until I've got the replacements, so I'll know exactly which order they go back on. So that sits into there, that's the only thing. And then what we'll do is put them back on. What I have seen some stuff is when we're putting this new valve here on, is there is some real stuff that we need to make sure that we're doing before we put this back on. Sticking it on dry can damage it. We need this to be really secure when we're putting this back on, and everything else on there, which we will do. And we'll get some fresh oil in there to ensure that all of this fits back onto our rebuild of the Zontes Monster motorcycle that we're working on now, the 125. Again, if you haven't been watching the series, please go back through the videos on my shorts and my videos where we're taking this bike and we're rebuilding it, and I'm trying to teach you guys, as well as me, I'm trying to teach you guys how to understand this bike as much as I do, and I understand how motorbikes work. I think this is a perfect bike as well, because it's quite simple, but also has got some parts on there which are great to learn at. And please subscribe, because eventually we will be going on to another bike as well, a little bit harder, a little bit more complex, and we're moving up. We're also going to be working on some electric bikes as well in the future, but for now we're just going to learn all the combustion sides. But this is going to be transferable anyway, because once electric does take over, this stuff will still continue to be works as well. So really hope you enjoyed this video of taking apart the forks and understanding how to take apart the forks. Like I said, I'm not a professional, so I will probably put some pointers in the video as well, and some a description of what everything does. videos. But that is the basics of this. This is a set type of fork as well, so there is loads of different types of forks as well. So please don't just think this is the only type and every single one's the same. There is upside down, there is inverted, there is all sorts of different types of forks which you'll be working on. So again, do your research before you start taking apart any sort of component from your bike. If you aren't a professional or you don't understand it enough, please do that. And then again, thank you for watching. Thank you for following me on this journey. It really does help, just, you know, grabbing a couple of subscribers from each video. It keeps me momentum to continue creating and following on this project. So please like and share and get people involved as we go on this journey together. Thank you.